Welcome to the Thursday edition of the program, which I begin with Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Senator from South Dakota. Senator Thune, welcome back. It's great to have you, Leader. I understand you were in Columbus this past weekend at the Shoe. How loud was it, Senator?
It was deafening, as you would expect, Hugh. Your fans came out in full force, and they got a big win. Great way to start off the season, and it was very exciting for me. And I had some of my family members there because it's just it's an atmosphere that's really second to none, as you know.
Well, you didn't get to see QB 1B, Lincoln Kienholz, who's from Pierre, South Dakota, but he will play this year. I think a lot. I don't know how often you're going to go back to the Shoe, but he will play.
I hope so. He's incredibly athletic. I got a chance to watch him, of course, in high school, and he's a special athlete. So yeah, I hope they find a way to integrate him into some of their schemes, offensive schemes or whatever, because I think he can bring a lot to that offense. But they're talented.
I am waiting to see special packages for him, and I expect Coach Day to do that. Now, Leader Thune, I want to get to the important stuff. I watched your press conference after the conference meeting yesterday. The Dems have been absolutely standing in the way of everything when it comes to nominees. You have pledged to invoke the nuclear option and change the nominee rules. When will that happen?
Well, if everything goes according to plan, hopefully next week. I think we're, as you would expect, Hugh, as we've kind of shopped these ideas around about how to do this in a way that actually helps us clear the backlog and creates a way for us to confirm the rest of Trump's administration, President Trump's administration. We got to figure out how to make sure we've got the votes to move it, and so we've been having those conversations here, and I hope that we get to a spot where we're ready to move, and if things go according to plan, I think we get on that next week.
Now, is that a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday next week, Senator?
I think it starts early in the week. My hope would be that we're on it Monday or Tuesday. It's going to take a little while because these things all have. Anytime you're talking about some of the changes that we're contemplating here, it takes some time to work it through the process. But we're intent. We know this has got to be fixed. The Democrats have created this problem. Chuck Schumer, but prior to Chuck Schumer, this was always done in a way where if you had some of the the lower level nominees in the administration, those were all handled by it voted in block. I mean, they were packaged, they were grouped. They were stacked, and that just doesn't happen. This is the first president in history, in the annals, as we went far as back as Herbert Hoover's administration. There hasn't been one president, with the exception of Trump, who at this point in his presidency hasn't had at least one nominee clear by unanimous consent or voice vote. It is unprecedented what they're doing. It's got to be stopped. The president deserves his team, and that's what the American people voted for, and we intend to deliver it.
I did my research. I want the audience to know what I'm working off of. In the 101st Congress, which was H.W. Bush's Congress, 817 civilian nominees received confirmation by unanimous consent voice vote. Under President Clinton, it was 1,100. In the 107th Congress for W, it was 911. In the 111th Congress for President Obama, it was 856. In the 115th Congress for President Trump's first term, it was 533. In the 117th Congress for President Biden, it was 530. This Congress, zero. Not one unanimous consent voice vote for a civilian nominee. The inverse of that, total Senate votes by year. 217, there are 187 Senate votes, 218, 200, 219, 262, 220, 157, 221, 358, 222, 325, 2023, 212, 2024, 230. Thus far in 2025, there have been 500 votes. What's that tell us, those two sets of data that I just gave us, Senator?
That the Democrats are engaging in record obstruction. I mean, we've been in more hours, more days, cast more votes than any Congress in certainly modern history, Hugh, and I think it's indicative of just the political environment. I mean, Chuck Schumer and the far left, this is Elizabeth Warren, it's Bernie Sanders, it's Chris Murphy, it's Cory Booker. They have decided to just virtually shut down anything that this president wants to accomplish and try and use the floor, the Senate floor, to delay and block and obstruct. And it is, as I've said, Trump derangement syndrome on steroids here in the United States Senate. It can't be, this just can't continue. We can't function as a government in this country unless the president is able to get his people in place. So it starts there. I mean, they're doing it on everything, but these nominees, you just pointed it out. I mean, you can't argue with the data. It's just absolutely crystal clear what they're up to, and that is to try and completely put roadblocks up and stop the Trump agenda. The American people voted for the president. They voted for him to have his team in place. And it also prevents us from doing other work. I mean, all the other things that we need to do around here, we're spending 2/3 of our time on personnel. I mean, think about that. The United States Senate is spending 2/3 of its time on human resources.
Well, there are between 1,200 and 1,400 positions that require the advice and consent of the Senate, and I believe you've been able to act on 135 of those thus far. I want to get to the particulars, but first, a little history. You're going to have to use the nuclear option. The Senate is a continuing body, so to change the rules is a big deal, and that means a continuing body, only a third of it comes in every 2 years, 2/3 of it are not new, and they have a rules package. Normally it's never amended, but Harry Reid, the late majority leader from Nevada, a Democrat, invoked the so-called nuclear option to change Senate rules by a simple majority on November 21st, 2013, for all nominees except Supreme Court nominees. Your predecessor in the Republican job, Leader McConnell, used the Reid rule, the Reid precedent, on April 6, 2017 to extend the Reid rule and the Reid precedent to Supreme Court nominees. Now you're going to invoke the nuclear option to change the Senate rules to do what, Senator Thune?
Well, I mean, we have to reform a broken system. You use the analysis that you provided, the data you provided earlier in terms of votes and time spent, time wasted doing nominations. This is historic. This has never happened before. In the past, both Republican and Democrat Senates, in the way that they treated both Republican and Democrat presidencies, as you point out, is that a lot of these lower-level nominees in various agencies and departments of our government were handled by unanimous consent. People just agreed. These are people that the president needs his team in place. So the level of obstruction is historic. We've got to reform a broken system, and so what we intend to do is to allow to happen what has happened up until now, just the old-fashioned way, by unanimous consent, where we take a block of these noms and approve them in block as opposed to having them to vote on them. First, you've got the way the Democrats are doing it right now. They force you to file cloture, which I've had to do endlessly. Then you have to have an intervening day. Then you have to invoke cloture. That's a motion to proceed vote. And then you have another intervening time period. And then you have a final vote. So we've exercised that, as you pointed out, 135 times already. But we have 300 nominees in the pipeline, either out of committee or coming through the process right now. Between now and the end of the year, to get them confirmed, and by the way, if they aren't confirmed by the end of the year, they go back and the administration has to resubmit them all over again. That would be 600 votes. And you said we've already had 500 votes, and we've been here more than any other Senate in history. So this can't continue. There is no way the American people deserve better than this. And the Democrats here in Washington have moved so far to the left in terms of who's, it's the tail wagging the dog, and I don't think Chuck Schumer has any control of his conference anymore. It's the far left that's driving this, and they aren't going to let this president have any wins on anything, and they're going to do everything they can to drag it out. So we've got to reform a broken process, and the way that we intend to do it is to get back to the way this was done prior to Chuck Schumer's Senate.
Now, Leader Thune, I've been doing this long enough. I was around when then Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist was going to use the nuclear option in 2005 because of an unprecedented Democratic blockade of George W. Bush's judges. And we got right up to the line to pulling the trigger, and 7 Republicans defected, and the Gang of 14 upended it. They sacrificed Miguel Estrada and other fine nominees like Carolyn Kuhl on the altar of Democratic appeasement. Are you certain of your conference? Are they going to support you in the nuclear option?
Well, we are doing everything we can right now, Hugh, to shore up, to make sure we've got the votes to execute on this, because, and that's obviously, that's a fair question. we're trying to
Pause right
confirm.
there. I recorded this with Leader Thune just before the show began. So let's roll it back to my question and play the second half of this because I want you to hear that in full. I do have flashbacks to being with a member of the Senate leadership when the Gang of 14 was announced, and that member of the leadership was so visibly stunned. You never know what your colleagues are going to do when you're talking about the Senate GOP. Continue my conversation with John Thune about whether or not he's got the votes, unlike Bill Frist in 2005. Are you certain of your conference? Are they going to support you in the nuclear option?
Well, we are doing everything we can right now, Hugh, to shore up, to make sure we've got the votes to execute on this, because, and that's obviously, that's a fair question. We're trying to confirm that. We've laid out the reasons why. I don't think there's any question. People acknowledge that this is a problem that has to be fixed. We can't continue like this. This is not, the Senate cannot do its work, is not going to be able to function as an institution unless we make some changes. But it's always a function of trying to...
Now, Leader Thune, the Republicans lost the Senate in the 2006 elections after the Gang of 14 intervened because I think in part, a lot of that was the Iraq War. A lot of it, though, was why have a majority if nobody uses it? There are two members of the Gang of 14 still left. I doubt very much Senator Graham or Senator Collins will vote against the nuclear option this time because they understand you can't run a government with 135 people. They're very serious people. But you've got some folks who aren't running for re-election who might just want to stick their thumb in Donald Trump's eye. Are you going to hold a vote regardless? Because I would like to know who, if someone won't support this, I'd like to know who.
Yeah, well, and you'll get that opportunity because I don't think we have any choice. We've got to move forward. I mean, the other alternative, as you know, and this is also I put this out there as a viable alternative. If in the event we don't have the votes to do it this way, there's always recess appointments. That also takes 51 votes because you have to adjourn the Senate, and there are some people who would, I'm sure, some who would object to that option. But I think if you look at the alternatives that are in front of us right now, the best way to do this is to change the Senate, reform the Senate rules in a way that enables the United States Senate and the President to get their people in place. I mean, I think that's, again, the American people, when they cast their votes last November, had an expectation that the President was going to be able to assemble a team to execute on the agenda that they voted for. And he is a duly elected president. He deserves to have his team in place. This obstructionist Senate is using the delaying, blocking tactics in ways that have never been done before. And in time I've been here and watched this, and like all the history that we compiled going back decades, never been done before. And so we've got to deliver. And we've got to make sure we got the votes to do that. But I think our folks realize that we don't have many options here.
Now, Senator Thune, I would approve of carving out judicial nominees for the same standard that is currently in place. Those are lifetime appointments. I understand going on a lifetime appointment, going as long as it takes and getting 30 hours of debate or whatever it is, 2 hours of debate. It depends on what job they're up for. But these are 3.5-year appointments. I just don't understand why it's even a question if they get out of committee that it gets a vote a week later. So are you going to divide the judicial nominees from all the other civilian nominees?
We are. I mean, we've left the judiciary as is, as we did with cabinet level appointees. Those are treated in a different fashion. But so many of these, the 1,100 or so that you mentioned on the executive calendar, are positions that, frankly, one, I would argue, I don't know that they need to have Senate confirmation in the first place. I think the President ought to be able to put his team together. But to the degree that they do need Senate confirmation, there needs to be a process that enables these people to get into their jobs in a reasonable time period. I mean, think about this. We are now 8 months into this President's term, and he has, I believe, 11 or 12% of his folks in place because we've had to grind it out. The Democrats have forced us to go through all the hoops. We haven't had a single one confirmed by unanimous consent, a practice that has been employed by Senates, like I said, Republican, Democrat, with Republican and Democrat presidents going back decades. This is a new level of obstruction, and it's got to be dealt with in a way that enables the President and us to do the jobs the American people elected us to do.
Now, I want to close this part of the conversation, Senator, by underscoring I'm prepared to live with this for Democrats as well. If you can get someone out of committee, they ought to get a vote. The Constitution all but says that. It says the Senate shall provide advice and consent. It doesn't mean you have to vote yes, but you have to provide a vote. That's implied there. Are your colleagues prepared to live with it under a Democratic president and a Democratic majority? Because they will have to.
Not surprisingly, that's been one of the big conversations. As you might expect, Hugh, you have folks, as we think through the long-term impacts of everything that we do, if you had a future Democrat president, a future Democrat Senate, what does this look like? And I think that on that point, I mean, I would argue that a Republican or Democrat president, people who run for that office are elected by the American people deserve to be able to put their team together.
Yes.
There are prerogatives that the Senate has, as you point out, constitutionally, advice and consent, and we want to preserve and retain that. We believe this does that. But we can't do what we're doing today. The Democrats have broken the system, and this is Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats, a problem of their making. Unfortunately, Republicans are going to have to clean up their mess.
Now, I understand you can't say one way or the other. I'm just putting it in your ear. Please force a vote on these changes because I want to know who among the Republicans is not really understanding their constitutional duty or their debt to the party. And that's fine. Let the chips lie where they may. But I want to know. The Gang of 14, we had the names. And the argument, we lost the Senate thereafter, having done that. Last question, Senator. The Schumer shutdown is in the offing. I can't believe he's going to do this. Are there any moves by the Democrats to prevent a government shutdown, or do they want one?
I think that they see it politically advantageous to have the government shut down because I think historically they always perceive, at least, that the president, party in power, is often blamed for that. But I honestly think if we have done our jobs right, I think we met with the Speaker yesterday, and I'm meeting later today with the President and the White House there are a number of things we're going to cover, including nominations. But I think, too, this question of funding the government and whether or not the Democrats who are trying to shut it down, I think that'll be clear.
If serious people could be heard, it would be louder than the Ohio State Stadium last Saturday. Senator Thune, they would be saying, go for the nuclear option, break the logjam, get the government staffed. And if Senator Schumer wants to shut down the government, leave it on him. Thank you for joining me, Majority Leader Thune. Come back after Monday or Tuesday, whenever the vote is. I appreciate it.
Will do. Sounds good. Thank you. Go Buckeyes.
Go Buckeyes. Noah Rothman, senior writer for National Review. You hear him often on the editor's podcast for National Review. Noah, I just had on Majority Leader Thune. You're a very experienced Washington reporter, and therefore you're cynical like I am. Do you think he has the votes to do the nuclear option as he vowed to do next Monday or Tuesday to change the confirmation rules in the Senate?
Yeah, I probably do. And I'm not necessarily sure that I welcome that. And whenever we chip away at minority rights, Republicans and Democrats come to regret it when they find themselves once again in the minority, as they invariably will be. But Democrats have no one to blame but themselves. They probably should have devoted some retrospection to Harry Reid's nuclear option in 2013, which begat this arms race and game of one-upsmanship that Democrats have continually lost ever since. Right now, you hear them talk about the extent to which they just can't be rolled. We just can't have a partisan CR, they say, a continuing resolution that features Republican priorities and only Republican priorities. By the way, just to keep the government open. This is a fight that I don't think a lot of people would understand. And if it comes to a shutdown, when I was a kid, when I was young, the conventional wisdom was Republicans were always blamed for the shutdowns because they were the party that wanted smaller government. And the party that wanted government to work would never shut down the government. So Democrats never got blamed for it. That's been shifted on its head over the course of the last 5-6 years, ever since the shutdown in 2018. And I think the new maxim is that the public isn't really that ideological and certainly not that gullible. They see the party that wants the shutdown and blames them for it, which makes a whole lot of sense. If Republicans wanted to shut down the government to stop the implementation of Obamacare, for example, they got the blame for it. And when Democrats want to shut down the government just to show that they're fighting fighters who fight, they get the blame for it. It all makes a lot of sense if you think about it.
Well, it does make sense to me. I'm also prepared for the Democrats to be able to vote on nominees that clear committee. That's what this comes down to. Not judicial nominees, by the way. They're going to keep those rules the same. It's only for nominees who clear a committee. Civilian, not generals, not judges, just civilian nominees for 3.5 years. You know, they've only approved 135 people out of 1,200, and we're 1/8 of the way through the administration, Noah?
No, I did not know that. And the personnel issues are piling up. And yeah, there does need to be something that needs to be done because the federal government needs to be staffed and it needs to function effectively. And the Congress needs to facilitate that, although they can exercise some discretion, but certainly not to the degree that they have gumming up the works. I am nevertheless trepidatious. You know, Hugh, this is the sort of thing that, you know, you just chip away at one little part of it here, one nominee process here, one aspect of this there, and always looming is the legislative filibuster, which is
Well, you know, I'd
always on
like
the
them to
table.
actually
And
vote on that
that's
now.
Chekhov's gun,
So,
you know?
yeah, I would like them to vote on that now so the Republicans could vote no and then switch their votes if the Democrats vote yes, like they say they want, and then take the legislative filibuster for a year and use it because they won't. Democrats will show that they're hypocrites. Quickly, Noah, because I'll ask Garrity about this later. President Trump blew up a boat from Venezuela yesterday. Don't know what Charles C.W. Cook would say. He's like me, an originalist, but I think it's within the commander-in-chief's power to do that. Do you?
I struggle with the legal authority there. I do not see, and I believe the 2002 AUMF is very expansive and can be applied broadly to our adversaries in the Middle East. I don't see a rationale in which it applies to drug traffickers from Latin America.
It's
so
the
the legal
commander-in-chief
authority,
power. It's nothing. It's
well,
the
second, well,
AUMF
then
does
let's
not
talk.
apply to this.
Okay, well then let's talk about the strategy. Let's assume this is all legal and valid. The problem with a kinetic war, a literal war on drugs, is that the limiting principle is hard to define. You have two problems when it comes to drugs, supply and demand. You will not address demand in this country. There's a market for narcotics in the United States, and it will always exist. So you go after the supplier, and that will invariably get you closer and closer and closer to regime targets. These boats are middlemen. They are not going to stop the flow of narcotics into the United States via third parties. You will be, and I guarantee you the president has options on the table right now to strike regime targets because the actions like these will not effectively staunch the flow of narcotics in and around the
Didn't
Caribbean.
we do that with Noriega
In regime change?
in Panama? H.W. Bush took out Noriega.
Yeah, you're making my point for me. We had to execute something, it didn't last, but we had to execute a regime change operation in order to affect the kind of policy that we wanted to see. And that is the conundrum that's going to confront this administration if this is a sustained campaign. They're going after the symptoms, not the malady. And as a result, they're going to be ineffective
But my
unless
point,
and
my
until they
legal
take out
point,
regime
Noah,
targets.
if H.W. could take out Noriega and take over a country, certainly we can blow up some speedboats to try and deter some of the supply. 30 seconds.
No, we can and have. And I think the legal issue is not something that Republicans should dismiss. Democrats certainly won't. But if you focus on the strategy here, which I want to, I just don't see how it works out in the administration's favor unless they escalate. The logic of escalation will become inevitable and hard to ignore.
I think you're right. Noah Rothman, I think we agree that escalation is in the cards, and I think the American people are tired of 100,000 people dying a year. Thank you, Noah C. Rothman. Follow him on X at Noah C. Rothman. Listen to the editors. Vic Mattis is the arts and culture editor of the Washington Free Beacon, and he's in a brooding mood. Look at how dark that shot is. That's because, let's go to the D.C. camera and show what's going on in D.C. It's in the grip of one of those terrible thunderstorms that can capture our region, Vic. Makes you look like you're in the bat cave, my friend.
That's right, Hugh. As you know, it is still technically summer, so you get some of these summer storms. We've gone several weeks, actually, without any rain, so it's much welcome, but I do apologize. I wasn't expecting it to be this dark. Normally, I got a lot of natural sunlight in my office for your show, but not today. I look like one of these, whistleblowers on a Dateline NBC special.
Yeah, it's fine. We're going to go and put up the cover of this book anyway. 13 novels conservatives will love, but probably haven't read. It's a book by Christopher Scalia. I interviewed Christopher about this week. Have you reviewed this in the Washington Free Beacon yet, Vic?
Oh, yes. I made sure that we reviewed it, I believe, the weekend before it came out. And it was reviewed by another wonderful writer, Micah Maddox. I highly recommend his Substack, which is Proofrock. and it's just great recommendations of things to read, both fiction and non-books that come out, on a weekly basis. And he does a wonderful review of Chris Scalia's book. And as you know, Chris is also a reviewer for the Weekend Beacon. And this weekend, in fact, Hugh, Chris reviews a book on the works of Elmore Leonard. You're going to love it. It's great.
Oh, I interviewed Elmore Leonard long ago, probably 1995. I didn't realize he wrote Westerns as well as noir and everything else. So, and did his music. Vic, I want to find out if I'm better, worse, or tied with you in terms of the 13 novels. So here we go. Novel one, Samuel Johnson's Rasselas. I have not read that. Have you read that?
I have not read it.
All right, Francis Burney's Evelina. I have not read it. Has Vic read it?
No, I'm familiar with Dr. Fanny Burney, but I have not read Evelina.
All right, Walter Scott's Waverly. I'm 0 for 3. What do you say?
I've read of it in the Weekly Standard.
Doesn't count.
I have not read in it. Okay.
Doesn't count. The Blithedale Romance by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm 0 for 4. What are you, Vic?
Yeah. No, I haven't read any of Hawthorne's work.
George Eliot. Oh, God save us. Daniel Deronda. No, never, no. What about you?
Same. So far, we're tied. It's very close.
All right. I'm going to move ahead or tied right now. Willa Cather's My Antonia. I have read this. I loved it. How about you?
My wife read it. She loved it. Does that
does
work by
not
osmosis?
Count. That does not count. So you're 0 for 7. Okay,
Yeah,
Zora Neale Hurston. Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's a no for me.
No, haven't read it.
Evelyn Waugh, Scoop.
Yes.
Yes, of course we have. We're both journalists. Yes.
Yeah.
So
it's wonderful,
I'm 2, you're
cynical
1.
take. Yeah.
Muriel Spark, The Girls of Slender Means.
No. You?
Nope, not for either of us. Number 10, A Bend in the River by V.S. Naipaul.
I read his other work in school, but not that one.
I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I am
Yeah,
so
that's good
unfamiliar with his
Yeah.
work. P.D. James. I've read a lot of her work. This one is The Children of Men. If I read it, I don't remember it. Do you?
Does the movie count?
No.
Oh, you're so
No.
tough.
Then I'm going to move ahead of you right here. Leif Engler's Peace Like a River, a fabulous novel. Have you read it, Vic?
No, and that's a new one, and people are really talking about it because it's somewhat, I think it's sort of autobiographical, but also magical, if I'm not mistaken.
Magical realism, but very deeply religious. And
Yes.
so I recommend it to you.
Okay.
Finally, Christopher Beha, The Index of Self-Destructive Acts. I'm a no.
No, thank God I read Scoop. I think you have beaten me 3-1 or 2-1.
3-1. So here's the bigger question. Christopher is very much a pessimist about Americans in reading. Are you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you talk to, I don't know, kids these days, I mean, you see these studies that a lot of kids going into college have not been tasked with reading a book from beginning to end, just excerpts, and they go through college just reading parts of books. And a lot of these professors are saying that, they have students complain that they can't handle the workload because they've been never challenged like this before. And I think this probably dates back to even before COVID times, but we need to go back to reading books. And as Chris points out, especially conservatives, I love histories. I love nonfiction. I review James Holland's book, Casino 44, about the Italian campaign, also in the Sunday upcoming Weekend Beacon. I don't read enough fiction, and I'm working on it, and this book is a great way to get started.
So my exit question, Vic, is Dr. Kissinger in his last book called Leaders or Leadership, I think it's
Yes.
Leadership, the last chapter says we are moving from a literate age to an age of imagery. And it's very pessimistic. People aren't going to read anymore. Are you that? I think he's right. I wish it were not so, but I think he's right. You think he's right?
Yeah, by the way, just another plug for my section. I believe Neil Ferguson reviewed that for us, that book. It's a great review.
Oh.
He is right, but you're beginning to see this change in a number of states, Hugh, where they are now doing things like banning cell phones in many states, including the great state of Virginia, altogether in schools. And there are some states that still allow it, which I can't believe. Schools, educators, and students themselves are learning the hard way that this is really detracting from their social interactions and from their learning. So if they can ban the cell phones in the classroom, which they have to put in these special pouches or they have to hand it when they walk into the school, that's a start. And maybe we can, turn things back to the way they once were, and they'll be reading Waverly, including you and me.
Victorino Mattis, thank you. Follow Victorino Mattis, the weekend arts and culture editor at the Washington Free Beacon, as well as co-host of the Getting Hammered podcast at Victorino Mattis on X. Follow me. Vic gave me the great pivot to the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, alec.org/Hugh. They rank the states every year in richstatespoorstates.com, richstatespoorstates.com. Part of that is going to be the education system. I hope they give points, and I may ask Jonathan Williams later in the program about, or tomorrow when he comes on, whether or not they will give points to school districts or states that have bans on phones in schools, because they are destroying attention span. They are destroying our ability to read and to flourish and to love reading. And if you want to find out what's going on in the states, sign up for the State of the State newsletters at alec.org/Hugh. That's alec.org/Hugh. It's a weekly newsletter. You can also get richstatespoorstates.com for free by simply going to richstatespoorstates.com. Coming up next hour, Aviv Reddig Gur. Do not miss that. I check in with him every other month or so, sometimes every 6 to 7 weeks, about all things Israel. He joins me. He's now with the Free Press. The Free Press is now part of CBS, if the reports are to be believed. That's great news. Barry Weiss has built a real news organization. That's good news for people who love news, and that includes me. Also love this, Relief Factor. It's time to take it, because I did my 10K today, and that makes 8 in a row. Tomorrow's an off day. Tomorrow is a definite off day because I've got to do a speed workout on Saturday, and that means I get to rest on Friday. But there are the 4 pills. I just opened it. Icarian and curcumin, resveratrol, omega. And if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, you just saw me take it that easily. And why do I do it? Because I do 10K a day, at least 4 times a week, and often, when I'm doing it right, 6 or 7 times a week. And this week it'll be 6 times a week, and I'm very, very pleased that not a thing hurts. And I was a little bit worried because throughout most of the summer, which is now behind us, I was taking care of kids, and therefore hard to get 2 hours set aside for warm-up, run, and warm down and stretch and all that other good stuff. But Relief Factor, well, doesn't much matter if you come back hard and strong and go the distance like I have for the last 8 days. Not bragging, just stating the facts. Relief Factor works. Take it every day. The minor aches and pains will fly away. Whether for exercise or aging, and you're definitely doing the latter, and you should be doing the former. And if you're not, start today. Get into the weekend. Start with a half mile or a quarter mile and just go up every day. And Relief Factor, all you have to do is call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. 1-800-4-RELIEF. Or go to their website, relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. I want to close the hour by telling you I got an email today from a friend who is helping her daughter buy a house or a condo or an apartment in Washington, D.C. I don't know which. They're going to buy in the district. She wanted to know, who do I go to for a loan? And I said, andrewandtodd.com, 888-888-1172. I said, that's easy. Not only did they do our loan when we moved back to the Beltway, they did the loans for my whole family when they've moved all over the country. They've done the loan for Dwayne. They've done the loan for lots of people in Salem. They've done the loans for thousands of watchers and listeners to the Hugh Hewitt Show, and I've never had a complaint. Not one complaint. 888-888-1172. I do get a lot of thank yous. I do get a lot of, they were amazing. I can't believe borrowing to that much money to buy a house could be that easy. I can't believe mortgage bankers were that responsive. I can't believe this, because they normally aren't. But Andrew and Todd are. AndrewandTodd.com with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. Andrew Del Rey I've known for 25 years. Todd Avakian half that time. 888-888-1172. No matter where you live in the country, give them a call. No matter what you need, whether it's a reverse mortgage because you're 62 years and older and you're living in your primary residence and you don't want to pay any more mortgage payments, or whether you're a VA, a veteran, you don't want to put any money down, or you're just a first-time home buyer, or you just need to refi, 888-888-1172, andrewandtodd.com. Thank you. I'm joined by Aviv Reddig Gur, senior analyst for the Times of Israel, whose podcast, Ask Haviv Anything, is a must-listen-to podcast now. Haviv, I listened to your conversation in Norway with, I gather, a Gentile in front of a Jewish audience. I found it fascinating, and it happened before Belgium decided to sanction Israel for ongoing genocidal activities in Gaza. How would that have changed your presentation to the Norwegians, if at all? Because it was pretty stern as it was.
I don't think it would have. You know, there's such a. I'm now with the Free Press, and one of the things I love with the Free Press, the media organization in the United States, is that they tackle a lot of things that all kinds of different elites tell us are absolute truths, and then turn out to be false, and then these sort of sense-making elites move on to the next absolute truth that everybody has to abide by, and you know, nobody checks it, nobody has a serious discussion about it. Journalists don't critique themselves. Instead, they do the opposite. They just sort of sign on and bash anybody who disagrees. The genocide claim is one of them. And one of the ways, you know, there is, before I say that, there's so much real suffering in Gaza. They're genuine, profound. It's a war, and it's a bad war. And it's almost an unprecedented kind of urban war. In other words, if the Israelis are good, there's tremendous suffering. If you think the Israelis are terrible, there's tremendous suffering. But it's not enough to try and gain sympathy for that suffering or to try and find a path out of it. The way that this genocide discourse is raised, the way that all of these arguments about Israel generally, not about what Israel does, but what Israel is and how it is innately an evil thing that has to be destroyed before the world can ever be at peace again with itself. All of that stuff is this wild, bigoted exaggeration. And the simple answer to your question is I would have completely ignored it. The Belgian stuff is in keeping with that. There's so much happening in the world that is far worse even than the Gaza war. I know that's hard to believe because all anybody is getting on their TikTok is the Gaza war, but there's somebody making sure that that's all you see on TikTok. That doesn't exonerate Israel. It just says you're living in an information space that is deliberately manipulated to produce certain outcomes. And so I don't, you know, I'm here for a serious conversation with Palestinians about the suffering in Gaza and about Israeli misdeeds. But this stuff about now sanctioning Israel because of genocide, because of all this stuff that's just percolating in the zeitgeist, I don't take seriously.
I want to come back to that into your comments in front of the Norwegian audience in just a moment, but I don't even know if the news has reached you yet that the Free Press is being acquired by CBS, which is the best media news I've heard in decades. Barry Weiss is entering into a deal. She will have a senior position at CBS News. I guess that means you're going to be working for CBS News. Are you no longer with the Times of Israel, Haviv, at all?
No, I mean, I am with the Times of Israel in the sense that it's Israel and it's a very informal place. And I've loved these people and worked alongside them for a very long time and do, you know, things with them. I'm also with the Free Press in all kinds of different ways and do things.
And CBS.
Wherever we could. And now CBS, listen, you know, I don't know anyone on this earth who could build what Barry Weiss built there. And I am one of the people who can say, you know, I knew her before everyone else did, before she was famous. I don't know if that's, we were acquaintances and friends a while back. I was once in New York for a year because my wife was doing a law degree and we ran in the same circles. And I have to tell you that the critique that you hear from a brilliant young person of the media landscape, and then 13 years later, they're getting bought out for $200 million by CBS. Pay attention to smart young people who tell you critiques of the world as it is. They might just change it.
I'm pretty proud of my record on Barry Weiss and calling attention to her. The fact that she and I were at loggerheads when she was a young editorial assistant at the Wall Street Journal doesn't even faze me. She's brilliant, and I'm glad that the merry band of journalists that she has gathered there include you and Douglas Murray and many others. Back to the Norway piece. I heard you tell a Norwegian audience, basically, I'm going to use the language of the law that maybe Rachel Gurr would appreciate. You don't have standing to tell Israel anything. All of Europe's Jews are dead because people, your parents and your grandparents, either participated in or stood by, except for a tiny fraction of them, as Europe's Jews were exterminated. So why don't you all shut up? That's how I would phrase it, Haviv. That's how I heard it. Did I hear too much?
I would say even more than that. Leave the Jews to the side for a
Okay.
second. Leave the Jews
Yeah.
to the side. Okay. I love talking about Jews. They're my people. I live among them. You know, we spend all day talking about ourselves like any people, any small people that's relatively provincial. But I'll say more than that. Europe did the greatest evils, and I'm talking specifically about World War II, in the history of the world. Now, it has stiff competition. It has stiff competition from various peoples in Asia over the course of history. The Mongols killed so many people that there's some research paper that I once read about that you could see the death toll and the burning of cities in the carbon record of the archaeologists are unearthing. But nevertheless, recently Europe did these horrific things, and then Europe tells itself this story that it learned from the tragedy of the Holocaust, learned from the horrors of World War II, and became a liberal and moderate and deeply humanizing and kind and sweet place. And here's where the Jewish perspective comes in. That's not how it felt to the Jews. If you're a Jew, you can't help noticing that the moment Europe stopped hating people and committing genocides was the moment there was nobody to commit genocide against. In other words, Europe totally homogenized. Europeans after the war, people forget, but after the war, Eastern Europe didn't want any more Germans, understandably, except that these are ethnic Germans who had never actually been German citizens and had been living in the places they were living in for centuries. And they were moved forcibly, ethnically cleansed out of Eastern Europe into the state of Germany after World War II in their millions. Europe homogenized everywhere. It massacred and it moved forcibly everybody until it was almost entirely homogenous, and then entered this period of tranquility. Now, Europe has in the last 30 years imported into itself a vast minority, and it has automatically, almost instantly, upended European politics and driven a kind of topsy-turvy rise of far right and far left. And so, Europe was never moral while having a minority to actually deal with. Now that there's a minority again, Europe's again being torn apart. So I deeply distrust their morality. And the feigning to having been moral for the last 70 years as a lesson of their own crimes isn't really true, because their crimes were successful. They were successful. The Nazis lost the war to the Americans and to the Russians. That war they lost, but there was another war the Nazis were fighting, which was the war on European Jewry. And that war they won. They shattered, destroyed, and obliterated European Jewry. And the most you can say about the Jewish communities in Europe today is that they're trying to pick up some of the tiniest little threads, shreds and pieces to rebuild something in Europe. So no, Europe doesn't get to pretend to have been moral. Now that they have a minority, they're struggling again.
All right, let's pause it right there. I'm going to come back. I talked to Haviv before the program, and I want to come back, but the market did just close, and I've been following gold very closely for the last few days. Market Report is always brought to you by AmericanFederal.com. Nick Rovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com buy and sell gold and silver and other precious metals. They also do collectibles, but that's not their main business. Their main business is selling and buying gold. Whether you're a first-time customer or a veteran buyer of gold, really do give Nick and his team a call at 800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. They do $1 million purchases. They do, I want to buy a quarter ounce of gold. What does gold cost today? Then they add their commission on it. The more gold you buy from them, the less the commission. The more gold you sell them, the less the commission. But it's all about volume, and they got to make a profit. Gold today dropped $29 an ounce to $3,609 an ounce. If you were listening yesterday to John Campbell, he explained, and he's not with AmericanFederal.com, and he's not a gold bug, though, like me, he has some gold in his safety deposit box. John Campbell explained that central banks are buying gold as faith in the dollar recedes. I'm not sure how far faith in the dollar is going to recede, but gold is at $3,609, and if you want to begin a plan to buy gold, do it with Nick Rovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com. The Dow went up 0.77% today. The S&P went up 0.83% today. And the NASDAQ went up almost 1% at 0.98 today. The tech-heavy NASDAQ, I don't know what that means, but gold went down $29. It's at $3,609 an ounce. And if you want to buy some, go to AmericanFederal.com or call Nick and his team at 800-221-7694. Develop a plan with them and then stay on your plan and plan to come back for more of Haviv Reddy Gur. I sat down with Haviv Reddy Gur last hour. Here's the part 2 of that interview. Position, Haviv. The West has not turned against Israel. The left in the West has turned against Israel, and the left controls a few governments, like in the United Kingdom, where it's first past the poll and a very, very, it's not even 40% of the people elected the Starmer enormous majority in parliament. So the European left and the American left has turned against Israel per se, and some of it against Jews per se, anti-Semitic, but not the world. I don't believe the world's there. Do you think that message gets through at all to Israel?
Well, Israelis really are provincial. They speak Hebrew. They talk amongst themselves. They don't listen so much to what's happening around the world about them. I'm not going to name other nations because they'll get insulted for no reason. But the point is, like any small people with its own distinct language and culture, they're very focused on themselves. And so when Israelis, in as much as they think about the world, they assume anti-Semitism. And they assume anti-Semitism because the anti-Semitism makes all the news. So if all you know of America is what you see on TV, you got to assume that every town and village and city in America is struggling with trans issues as its primary issue, and not parking in New York City. The Israelis watch the world from TV, where anti-Semitism looms very, very large, and violence and brutality and insane politics and marches in the streets. In some places, that cartoonish news-created version is not far from reality. For example, in the streets of London. But in most places, it is far from reality. And so I think Israelis don't understand that. But also, look, I believe that the world's reaction to Gaza is divided into two groups. One group are the deep, hard ideological activists and the state parties that back them, including, by the way, the Chinese Communist Party that drives the TikTok algorithm to favor Gaza images tenfold over, for example, Instagram. And that is radicalizing the young people of the West. And it's radicalizing them against Israel, but only as an avatar for radicalizing them against the West, which is why people like the Chinese government are interested in this. But then there's the huge majority of people who are not anti-Semitic and not radicalizing against Israel. It's just, if it's already in the news and if it's already terrible, and if those are the images you're seeing, they are having a very natural and moral reaction to terrible images and terrible news that isn't explained well by the media, by certain sense-making elites. So, and all that's to say, Israel's not obviously beyond reproach. There's a terrible war underway, but it isn't just anti-Semitism, but the core activist group absolutely manifestly is driven by a bigotry and a hatred, by the way, of the West and all the bad things the West has ever done, which it imposes on Israel so it can have its moral restitution by hating Israel now as a stand-in for hating itself.
The phrase, the sense-making elites makes a lot of sense to me. I know what you're referring to. I'm not sure everyone else will, but they are the editorial class, the people who control largely, not exclusively, but largely control headlines and production. They're not at the Free Press. They're not here. They're not on Fox, and I'm glad about that. Hopefully they will soon be gone from CBS as well. I want to ask you before I turn to Gaza, Haviv. Yesterday, President Trump ordered Southern Command to smoke a jet boat full of cocaine and fentanyl and 11 drug traffickers. Do you expect the International Criminal Court to come after Donald Trump and the members of the military who ordered that attack?
No, I do not.
Neither do I. Why do you think that is?
I'll tell you, never mind, I sure hope they never come after the American president. But what would be nice? It'd be nice if they went after the Chinese president or, in a serious way rather than just a press release, the Russian president or, all of the great vast criminals. Millions of people have been mass murdered. Actual genocides have actually taken place actually in the last 10 years. And, not a lot of not a lot of international movement or marches. I know there's a, I keep getting told by well-meaning people that there's a higher standard for Israel, but there's no libel campaign on that scale for people who killed 10 times as many. Maybe you're just dehumanizing the others, or maybe you just actually hate Israel. Maybe it's not a higher standard. It's amazing to watch everyone suddenly discover their dramatic love for Israel and have this tremendously high standard for Israel. I have a higher standard of behavior for my kids from the rest of the world. I don't have a higher standard of behavior for a random neighbor. You don't have a higher standard for Israel if you libel it and lie about it. Look, it's been a weird week, okay? In this one week, there have been half a dozen things that turned out to simply be fake. Every single major podcast and media outlet in America, from Tucker Carlson to CNN, has gone with this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation whistleblower who talked about watching this child be murdered. And now they've found the child. The child is alive and well. And Fox just reported that. And that's weird. Now I'm waiting for CNN to come out with the, oh my God, maybe this guy is a raving lunatic liar that we all of us everywhere platformed because it fits our pre-existing beliefs without fact-checking a single thing. We had the International Association of Genocide Scholars that we just discovered of its 600 or 800 members, 10% are Iraqis who joined randomly, and we don't know who they are. And it turns out you can join for a $125 fee, and you don't have to be a scholar or know anything about genocide. And over the last day and a half, some I don't know, pro-Israel activists have just been joining with random silly names, and so they're now a whole bunch
Emperor
of members of
Palpatine joined. Yes,
Emperor
it's
Palpatine
it's a hilarious exposure of a front group. But what's not
right,
hilarious
but when they
is
released,
yeah,
exactly,
that's not hilarious.
No, what they released a statement that said that was signed by 100 of their members. We don't know who most of those 100 are, and they released and the argument in the statement, the way that the statement was presented in the Washington Post, for example, was that this was now the consensus of genocide scholars. And it turns out it's a random organization anybody can join at any moment. And this was something that the Free Press ran with. And I don't know who else would have run with first. In other words, they came out with this and really took it down first. So one thing after another. Here's the thing. Gazans are suffering. You could report on their actual suffering. We have tremendous data. I have reported personally on Gazan suffering. And that's enough to build sympathy for Gazans. But the system as a whole, and I mean the entirety of elite academia, by the way, is the other half of the sense-making elites, and they're also in on this. But almost the entirety of the sense-making elites of the West are lying anyway. They go into these solipsistic spirals of just lies that, and then suddenly you start to think, well, why was it a conspiracy theory to talk about the Wuhan lab leak? Why was it a conspiracy theory to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop? I know that I'm treading dangerously into American domestic politics. I don't want to go there. I think this is something that on occasion conservatives have done as well, but this is over on the sort of elite liberal side is constant. It's a constant one thing after another, where when you talk about, is this correct? Have we fact checked this? Do we actually know this? Your career is jeopardized, or you're mocked, or you're called a conspiracy theorist. Why do they lie when there's no need to lie? You could get tremendous sympathy for Gazans without lying, but they nevertheless, those emaciated kids who look that way on the front page of the New York Times, seen by hundreds of millions of people and billions of social media impressions, that didn't look that way because of hunger. Why?
And we will be right back with more of Aviv. Before I return to my interview with Aviv Rediger, I want to remind you I'm in the Relief Factor studio. If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, I've got the bag in my hand. If you were watching in the first hour, you saw me take it, as I do every day, because I like to feel good. At the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, I like to sleep well. I like to not have minor aches and pains nag at me throughout the day. And I'm up and down a lot. And I've been having a great week on the roads I think I'm up to 8 consecutive days of 10Ks. Tomorrow is an off day, not because I hurt or ache. I don't. I take Relief Factor. But it's because I am mindful of the need to have off days. You can't trundle every day, and then Saturday's a speed workout. Doesn't really matter if I take my Relief Factor, if I take a week off and then go hard for a week. It doesn't matter, because Relief Factor helps the body's natural anti-inflammatory system keep the minor aches and pains that come with good old exercise. And if you're not exercising, you should be. Got to get the heart rate up every day, preferably for at least a half an hour, sometimes an hour. Better to do 2 hours once in a while. But whatever you do, whether you're walking, running, rowing, whether you're swimming or doing gym rat stuff, whatever you do, Relief Factor will make it easier on you. Call and get their 3-week starter pack for $19.95, 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800-4RELIEF, or go to their website, relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Now back to my interview with Aviv Redigor. I really believe it's just market forces as people are forced into more and more marginal market niches. They've got to super serve people who expect to be served anti-Semitic content, and they'll turn you off if they don't get anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist content. So they up their anti-Zionist game in order to keep and hold the marginal subscriber, the marginal eyeballs. Let me go to the actual reality of Gaza right now. I do not understand, nor should I, the IDF's war plan, because they've been staging a preparation to enter Gaza City for a month now. 60,000 reserves were called up last week. Do you understand what the IDF war plan is and how long they expect it to take? It will be difficult. All the bombs are in all the buildings and people have got to leave, but they're not telling us enough to make sense of what they're planning to do.
Let me try and convey what it is I understand the IDF is planning without, by the way, being for or against. I just to say, within Israel, there's a lot of skepticism and a very big debate over going forward with this operation. So just to lay out the concept. The basic idea is very simple. Gaza City was, before the war, the largest city in Gaza. It still is the largest city in Gaza, but many cities, the population's moved out to humanitarian zones, etc. But it was, before the war, the largest city in Gaza. It contains now about 800,000 people. It is roughly, give or take, a little less than half the population of Gaza currently. And the IDF has had a raiding war there, but it has come in, taken out Hamas target, gone out, but it has never controlled the ground. Now, Hamas has in Gaza City massive infrastructures. The tunnel system within that area of Gaza, it's been significantly degraded other places. There it is still mostly intact. And it has essentially served for 23 months as a sanctuary for Hamas. It is hunkered down there and just saying, whatever the hell happens to Gaza, we can sit this thing out in Gaza City. And the concept of the Gaza City operation, and there's also Deir el-Balach and the camps in the central coastal strip, in the center of Gaza, a couple other places, but Gaza City is the very big one. These have served as these sanctuaries. And the concept is deny Hamas these sanctuaries. It really struggles profoundly to operate, even just at a guerrilla level, outside of Gaza City. And it is still very much safe and sound inside Gaza City. So it's the systematic continued denial to Hamas of more and more territory. It's brutal, it's long, it's slow. When the Americans and the Iraqis did this against ISIS in northern Iraq, going city by city, urban warfare fighting, it took 5 years. And ISIS was much less dug in than Hamas. So that is the concept. That is sort of the broad strokes military idea. What is the actual strategy? A lot of detonating of tunnels, a lot of demolishing of buildings. Buildings, because Israel announces before it goes into a place, it never doesn't encounter massively, entrapped, with IEDs and stuff, buildings that it enters. Finding those tunnels, detonating those tunnels. A detonation of a tunnel means the destruction of the street that it goes under. And so it's basically a kind of demolition war to catch those Hamas infrastructures and destroy them. And the army is probably next week going to issue the final order for all civilians to leave, and then begins the infantry entering. Now, almost all the suburbs and surrounding areas of Gaza City have already been taken, which I think in terms of municipal lines is 40% of Gaza City is already in IDF hands.
Let's pause right there because that confirms a headline in the Times of Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces say they have already seized 40% of Gaza City. So they are tightening the noose around what is left of the remnants of Hamas. And I don't think Israelis care what Belgians think. And I don't think they should. More with Aviv Redigor later in the program. I'm going to come back with Josh Kraushaar, though, to ask him about his read of what's going on in Gaza. He's the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh Kraushaar is editor-in-chief of the Jewish Insider, and he's also a veteran D.C. journalist. I was just talking with Vic Mattis last hour. The storms were something inside the Beltway. Have they let up, Josh?
They just did. In fact, I'm here on in my home office, the patio, and it was pouring about 30 minutes ago, and now the sun is out. So we have not had rain, Hugh, for like a month. I mean, we've it's been an unusual DC August. We usually get a lot of humidity, a lot of storms. We've pretty much had like a month with very few, very little rain, very nice days for quite some time. So
No, we
very
had Vic Madison,
warming day.
and Vic, it looked like the War of the Worlds was starting. It went from like good lighting to ominous thunder, Thor coming down from the sky. Josh, I could talk to you about Israel, but I want to ask you more broadly about the media. I've been talking with Aviv Redig-Gur about the coverage of Israel in the media. And today, the big news, of course, is that CBS, which was just acquired by Mr. Ellison of Oracle fame and his son, they're going to buy Barry Weiss's The Free Press, and she's going to have a senior editorial role at CBS. I think this is a big deal for the Tiffany Network to bring in Barry Weiss and the Free Press and to give her a senior editorial role at CBS News. What do you think?
I think it's a great development. I think the secret to the Free Press's success is they ran the other direction when there was a herd mentality to the left increasingly in so much of the mainstream media. And the secret sauce for the Free Press was that they built an audience of both moderate Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and MAGA folks because they saw this consensus, this left-wing consensus that had emerged at too many traditional news outlets, which led Barry's own story about leaving the New York Times, basically being pushed out of the Times because of this ideological hothouse and a lack of diversity within the newsroom. I mean, that was a major moment in the media, and it led to the creation of the Free Press. And the Free Press has been very successful because it's been, and frankly, represents, I think, an editorial view that a lot of Americans hold, but wasn't being covered or represented in much of the traditional press. So that's part of its success. I think.
I also think, Josh, and I wonder if you'll comment on this. It seems to me that Barry and her colleagues have put an emphasis on hiring young, sparkling intellect. And I think of Doug Murray and I think of Aviv Redig-Gur as just two examples that, one day they weren't working for her and the next day they were. And they're both brilliant and they're both under 45. And that's what I want to read. I want to read people who are smart, giving me news, hard facts, and then analysis of those hard facts. And you really can't get better than Douglas Murray and Aviv Redig-Gur. You might equal them, but you can't get better than them.
Yeah, I mean, look, Barry has a great eye for talent. Those are just two of the many names I think that have been in her circle. My friend Abigail Schreier wrote the book, one of the most seminal books about the transgender movement. That she was published in the Free Press. I think her work should be winning awards for the impact it's had on that very issue, which, by the way, the New York Times is now writing about, and a lot of mainstream publications are now covering the way Abigail did initially, when it was very unpopular and very difficult, frankly, to get to the truth of some of these very hot button cultural issues. So yeah, no, I think that is an example of fear. Look, when I got into journalism, my whole to me, it was about curiosity. I have a lot of questions. And Barry, I think, comes from that same cloth. And what was happening too often, especially around 2020, 2021, there was a real activist, ideological sentiment in a lot of newsrooms where people weren't asking questions. They were just trying to spin narratives. And I think Barry kind of saw through that and really asked the right questions, really covered a handful of stories really aggressively and really well, and really, made a name for herself, but also made a name for the publication. And you can see in terms of,
there's legacy media,
the big number.
People can define it as they want. But then there's new old media, which is talk radio and Fox News. Now there's new media, which is the Free Press, 1,000 podcasts. Jewish Insider, I think, is blown up because of attention being paid to the Middle East and the American Jewish population and the diaspora, as well as what's going on inside of Israel. There are all sorts of media now. There's the Salem News Channel that didn't exist 3 years ago. There all sorts of different things are popping up. Can CBS stay alive with a transfusion like this? Because if you look at 60 Minutes, I grew up on 60 Minutes. I mean, in high school, on Sunday night, you'd go watch 60 Minutes. That's it was a thing. I don't know who watches it now. Do you?
Yeah, look, my family was a CBS News family. We watched Dan Rather, we watched 60 Minutes. Look, and look, the history of CBS News. I kind of read Edward R. Murrow's autobiography, and just so many seminal figures in the history of broadcast journalism at CBS. We're in a changing. I mean, a lot of this is a changing business. I mean, the old model, the linear model of broadcast news is obviously hitting it's coming to an end, really. And I think Ellison, the new owner of Paramount, understands that things need to change, that the way to get a competitive advantage perhaps is to have a more moderate broadcast, a more centrist broadcast. So we'll see what happens. I mean, there's still a lot that has yet to transpire, but if there's some more diversity, ideologically at least, in the CBS newsroom, I think that would play to their editorial benefit.
Oh my God! Can you imagine if they just swapped out the hosts of 60 Minutes and put in Barry, Haviv, and Douglas Murray as their three primary interviewers? I think they would super turbocharge the viewership. And I've got nothing to do with CBS. I'd be interested. People would pay attention again. Very quickly, Josh, the headline over at the Times of Israel is that the IDF is in control of 40% of Gaza City already. Haviv just said it's a war of demolition. How long do you think it's going to take?
Well, I think it'll still take some time because it also is a war of words. It does seem, from my vantage point, that Netanyahu, the IDF chief of staff, other political leaders in Israel are talking a very tough game, backed by Donald Trump, by the way, about a full invasion into Gaza City, perhaps in hopes that the Hamas will come to the table and make the types of concessions, especially releasing all the hostages. Now, there have been some reports, I don't know how credible they are, that there's been some Hamas has made some offer on the table, but their word is really not that credible. But I do think some of the aggressiveness in Gaza City may be in hopes of reaching a better deal for the Israeli position.
I hope you're right. And the way for this to end would be for Hamas to deliver 20 Israelis and the remains of 30 more to an IDF soldier with a location and a map and they're all here. And then there would be some interesting aftermath. Josh Kroshauer, follow him at Josh Kroshauer on X. Thank you, my friends. I just read a story. One of my sponsors is webroot.com. You go to webroot.com/Hewitt and you'll get half off either of their two suites of products, either WebRoot Essentials or WebRoot Total Protection. You'll get half off. So I always do a check of the news on identity theft. This one blew me away today. Victims of identity theft are being enrolled in college by scammers using AI to steal financial aid. The Milwaukee Independent reports, it was an unusual question coming from a police officer. Heather Brady was napping at home in San Francisco on Sunday afternoon when the officer knocked on her door to ask, had she applied to Arizona Western College? She had not, and as the officer suspected, somebody else had applied to the Arizona Community College in her name to scam the government into paying out financial aid money. $9,000 had been given to a person who alleged to be Heather Brady and provided enough documents because they had gone to the deep web and stolen her information. So look, if you don't have any web protection, you need to get some. Webroot.com/Hewitt. Webroot.com/Hewitt. As I said, you can get WebRoot Essentials or you can get WebRoot Total Protection. One is good, the other is platinum. And it has to be a price point for you. And so check it out at webroot.com/Hewitt. But you'll get 50% off. And you get a firewall, a network monitor. Most importantly, you get advanced dark web monitoring to see who's got your data and when they got it. There's a system organizer, identity protection with rapid credit alerts, and up to $1 million in reimbursement for stolen funds. Think about that one, $1 million if anyone gets into your bank. WebRoot includes a VPN for up to 10 devices and unlimited cloud backup, restoration for your PC or Mac if it gets hacked. Go to webroot.com/Hewitt. I really don't think if you don't have computer protection, you're not paying attention to the headlines. And if you've got one of these, a cell phone, now I happen to have the color orange for the Cleveland Browns, but you might have your own team's color on there, whatever. It's not the color of the cover that matters. It's how much you're paying for the data you're using. And that brings me to my other sponsor, consumercellular.com. You can go to consumercellular.com/Hugh, and you'll get $25 off. That's $5 a month for your first 5 months, and you'll get savings without sacrifice. That means you'll save money when you call 1-800-411-4454 because you're probably buying way too much data. Now, if you want unlimited data and you're over 50, they got a great deal for you. 2 lines, like you and your spouse, you and your partner, 2 lines for $60 a month. That's it, unlimited data. But they also have smaller plans for people who just don't use much data, 5 gig plans, 10 gig plans. But what you want to do is call and find out. 1-800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. Use my code HUGH25 to get the $25 off. That's $5 off each of your first 5 invoices. 1-800-411-4454. 1-800-411-4454. You will thank me when you switch to Consumer Cellular. Earlier today, I caught up with Haviv Redig-Gur of the Free Press. Here's the conclusion of that interview from, I think, Israel's perhaps most prominent rising journalist.
That was something that was announced today. And the concept is then you slowly, painstakingly, it'll probably take many weeks, probably months. By the way, it'll produce images because people will be dying. We're hoping that everyone leaves. Everyone might not leave. They don't have a lot of places to leave to. It's not comfortable in Gaza in the tent encampments. So it is a continuation of the war to deny Hamas, again, another sanctuary that it has in Gaza. I'm an Israeli, I have to add, I apologize. Hamas could end this in about 60 minutes if it just releases the hostages and leaves Gaza, which is something the Arab League has already asked it to do.
And that's what President Trump said yesterday. The war will end if you release the 20 hostages. And I think that's true. I'm not sure that that would be fortunate, but it would happen. It would be almost inevitable. Let me conclude this way, Haviv. There is talk in Israel of annexing Judea and Samaria. I'm not sure if that means annexing the entire West Bank. I'm going to let you tell me what it means when parties in Israel propose annexing Judea and Samaria, and I suppose it depends on which party. But what's the mainstream understanding of that, and do you support that?
Yeah, for Israelis, it's all about the details. The West Bank looks like a thing, like a unit outside, but when you live in Israel, the West Bank is many different things. So, for example, the Jewish quarter of the Old City, because the Jordanians controlled it at the 1949 ceasefire moment of the signing of the ceasefire, it counts as the West Bank. In other words, it counts as a settlement if Israelis live in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. No Israeli thinks that the Western Wall, the holiest place the Jews can pray at, or the Jewish quarter of the Old City is the West Bank. And I mean, the far left progressive Jews don't think that that belongs to the Palestinians and counts as the West Bank, and that is annexed by Israeli law, and everybody's happy with that. And then you progressively, it gets more complicated, and you start losing different groups of Jews or political groups as you expand the understanding of what Israel should take in the West Bank. My own view is that a very great deal of the settlements and settlers, Israelis who live in various parts of Judea and Samaria, which is the name of the territory in Hebrew. West Bank is the Jordanian name. Jordan's on the east bank of the river. This is the West Bank part controlled by Jordan after 49. But huge numbers, 75% maybe, live within 4,000 feet of the Green Line. In other words, you could have a very minor territorial exchange that could solve that problem. It's Israel would probably end up at the Clinton parameters, put it that way. The Oslo peace process talked about Israeli annexation of major settlement blocks close to the Green Line. So I don't know an Israeli leftist who isn't in some way or another, supportive of some annexation. On the Israeli right or far right, I'm not judging them, that's just where they lie on the spectrum, you have then other plans of annexation that go to 80%, 90%, even 100%. The vast majority of Israelis don't want to annex the West Bank in the sense that they annex the vast majority of the territory in which Palestinians live. Because if you actually make that Israel, you make them Israeli. And if you don't make them Israeli, then you actually have two-tier citizenship, which is a whole nother game that nobody wants to be playing. And so it's all about the details. The Israeli left would love a territorial exchange, which includes Israeli annexation of pieces of the West Bank, and also could establish a Palestinian state that is coherent and actually without too many Israelis in it. The Israeli far right wants all of it, and everybody is in somewhere in the middle. So
Well,
the
with the
latest plan by
United
the
Arab
Talmud, yeah.
Emirates, the UAE has been a very responsible partner in the Abraham Accords, and they're a very responsible partner in the new Middle East. UAE has said annexation of Judea and Samaria will be catastrophic for regional integration. I don't know that they mean what you just described. I think they mean the whole thing, don't they?
I think they mean the exclusion of the possibility of a Palestinian state. They, by the way, at the Abraham Accords signing in the first Trump term, they talked that way. They talked about their peace with Israel, their normalization with Israel, pulled Israel back from a plan by the
Yes.
Netanyahu government of the day to annex, I believe it was 40% of the West Bank, 60%. There wasn't a final border put on a table, but it was somewhere in that space. And they said, we protected Palestine. Don't tell us normalization was giving up on Palestine. We actually protected Palestine. And so they see annexation as a betrayal of them, because that was understood by them and the Israelis as the sort of foundation stone of normalization. And now the Saudis, by the way, say the same thing. Normalization still available, despite the Gaza war, despite the political problems in the Arab world that it would cause them. But it depends on the next step, which is not just don't annex, but actually have a Palestinian state. And so, yes, that's the Emiratis' position for 5 years now, at least. And
All right.
they're
So
consistent with it, and that's what they said.
my very last question, and I'll probably ask you this in another 6 weeks to 2 months when you come back, and every time that you come back. There's been a convulsion in Israel since 10/7. It's going to be 2 years old probably by the time I talk to you next. I can't imagine Israeli politics will be remotely like it was at the last election. You might have Bibi Netanyahu running again, but do you expect all the chairs to have been rearranged in the auditorium and everyone to be coalitioning with other people because it's been such a traumatic, terrible, and yet extraordinarily victorious 2 years after the massacre? How could it possibly be the same?
It is surprisingly likely to be the same.
Oh,
Israeli voters vote. Yeah, this is we've talked about this before, but Israel is you would understand it better if you think of it as a very liberal, successful Lebanon rather than a weirdly conservative Switzerland. Israeli voters' behavior at the voting booth is deeply tribal. So the Sephardi, Arab world Jews, Haredi, ultra Orthodox political party Shas is a party that caters to a specific ethnic and cultural and religious subgroup. And they don't vote on policy, they vote on the belonging to the subgroup. Ditto the Ashkenazi, European Jewish, ultra-Orthodox party, the UTJ. Ditto, the gap between Likud and the main party in the opposition, Yesh Atid, is heavily a Sephardi or Mizrahi Jews in the Arab world vote Likud. In a majority of Likud's voters are actually from the Arab world, and a majority of Yesh Atid voters are Ashkenazi Jews. And that is a huge part of it. And by the way, you still see 60-year-old divides in the fact that the income disparity between voters of the Ashkenazi party and voters of Likud are about 2 deciles apart, favoring the Ashkenazi voters. And so everywhere you go in Israel, there's a political party that is Russian speaking, the Russian immigrants from the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And the Arab parties, one party, its base is the Bedouin conservative religious groups of tribes of the South. Another party are the urban elite, progressive, some of them even communist, Arab elites of Haifa and the cities of the north. And they're 2 different parties. And it's not, again, they don't debate policy, they debate tribe. That's exactly how Lebanon works. That's exactly how Iraqi elections, when they work, that's how they work. And so Netanyahu's tribe will continue to vote for him. And by the way, October 7 shattered his polling numbers. His own people didn't want him anymore. He's had a few successes since then that are big enough to build a campaign on. And that's what he's betting on.
Yeah. Now I'm going to close with a comment, not a question. I listened to the podcast and was amazed that for a period of time after the Army, you were Natan Sharansky's bodyguard. It was the honor of my life, and I tell this to people all the time, to share a stage with him at the Reagan Library a decade ago. When did you stop being? I'm just curious if you were in the room when I was with Natan Sharansky. When did you stop being his bodyguard?
I was actually part of a government unit that that was the circle of protection for several ministers. Folks, this is we're talking. I was young, I was fit, I was just out of the infantry, I was just a student at college. So I know it doesn't people don't associate that kind of a thing with me today, but it's been a while. But so I was in the unit that guarded. We took shifts and stuff, so there was a lot of us. The Minister of Science at the time, the Minister of Housing, who was Nathan Sharansky, and a couple other ministers. I don't remember you specifically. I only vaguely remember him, right? But what was funny
Well, if
was
you went to
10
the
years
Reagan
later.
Library, you would remember being at the Reagan Library because Air
No, I
Force One
wasn't
is
at the
that
Reagan
big.
Library.
All right.
No, I did
That's
not
the
join him on
coincidence.
that trip.
All right. Aviv, congratulations on becoming part of the Tiffany Network, even though you may not have known about it when you woke up this morning. The Free Press's own, now CBS's own, Haviv Reddy Gore. Follow him on X and listen to his podcast, Ask Haviv Anything. It's actually without parallel on the web. Thank you, Haviv.
Thank you.
Bethany Mandel joins me. She's the co-author of Stolen Youth. She is also a fabulous regular guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Follow her on Bethany Shondark on X. Bethany, Kash Patel said earlier this hour that the FBI had stopped a potential preschool massacre. Unspeakable act of cowardice. North Carolina man charged with making online threat to massacre dozens of black children. Do you want the FBI to do more of this? I do, but you're younger and you've got small kids, and it does mean the surveillance state, but I do want them watching for people like this.
I mean, I think they're always going to be watching people. The question is, are they going to be watching Moms for Liberty, or are they going to be watching terrorists? I prefer the terrorists.
I prefer the terrorists, and I prefer people who make threats against children. I asked Mark Zuckerberg once, an opportunity to ask him a question. I did, can you do the Minority Report thing? And he said no. That was 6 years ago. Do you think AI will allow us to identify school shooters before they murder and maim?
Well, what's wild about school shooters is I can't remember a circumstance in which people were surprised. They were like, I had no idea this was coming. Whenever something like this happens, especially with the last one that happened in Minneapolis, but they were all pretty much nuts, and no one knew what to do, and there was nothing really to do anything when faced with a person who has severe mental illness, because there's no way to put them in an institution involuntarily anymore, and mental illness, qualifications for gun acquirement is like not great. So I don't think that we need more. I don't think we need AI. I think we have what we have, and we just need to figure out how to act on the information we already have.
Well, that is the nut, right? That's the rub. What do we do with people that we know to be off their rocker? Now, it might have been politically incorrect to suggest the killer in Minnesota was off his rocker because he identified as a she, but that's not it. That's the false flag. The flag, it's the stuff in the notebooks. It's how can people miss that? Do you think people miss that?
No, he was very clearly nuts, and the trans identification was a manifestation of severe mental illness. And I think some people in his life decided that if they treated the gender dysphoria with transition, that he would be cured of his mental illness. But he was deeply disturbed, and you could see it right from his writings, right from the outset. It wasn't a mystery here.
So what crosses your mind as a possible solution? One thing is the federal government builds much more facilities for people with paranoid schizophrenia and violent tendencies, and houses the involuntarily committed at the cost of the federal government. I mean, that's making it a federal problem, and we all pay. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Bring sanatoriums back. we have we have the same number of mentally ill people as we did 100 years ago, only now they're on the streets. And we closed all of the mental institutions because we thought that was the kind thing to do. But I think it's even more unkind to have them living on the streets, which is, why we have so much problem in our cities, like in Baltimore, like in Washington, D.C., New York City, all through California, because the mentally ill are living on the streets. That's disgusting. It's not right.
And it requires an act of the state, which has a monopoly on violence, because people can't commit adults. You can't do it unless the government is behind you 100%. And that will run into, some people will be wrongfully confined, but the question is, which is the bigger risk? Not confining anyone or wrongfully confining some? What do you think is the bigger risk?
I mean, I think we have to have a happy medium. I mean, it was interesting watching the whole Free Britney campaign that happened around Britney Spears, because everyone was convinced she's one of the most closely watched people in the world, and most of her fans were convinced she was being held involuntarily within the confines of the conservatorship. Not fairly. It wasn't right that she was being held in that conservatorship, and then she was released from that conservatorship, and the world sees like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have freed Britney. Maybe she needed some supervision. So I am hopeful that the government can do this properly, but we have no idea, because it hasn't been done in, I don't know, 40, 50 years.
All right, now I want to switch to a second legal issue, and I'll ask Jim Garrity immediately after you about this. President Trump ordered a drug-running boat to be blown up, 11 people killed, and the drugs to the bottom of the ocean yesterday. There is, in my mind, no way to stretch the authorization for the use of military force following 9/11 to cover this. I think it's inherent in the commander-in-chief's authority to deploy the military to stop people from bringing drugs to the country. But what do you think, Bethany Mandel?
I think it was great. I think it was a show of force that we really needed. These folks are committing acts of terror basically on our shores. The number of people who have died from opioids, which is, they're bringing in drugs. The number of people who have died from opioids surpasses that of people who died in the Vietnam and Korea War combined. So if this is a war on drugs, then let's start acting like it.
Well, Noah Rothman at the first hour of the Today's program said, no, you got to worry about the end game where they're just going to send more boats. Are we really going to go to war and take out Maduro? And my answer is, George H.W. Bush took out Noriega in Panama. Why not?
It's not given our military capabilities. I mean, look what we just did in Iran. We flew nonstop, bombed the smithereens out of their nuclear reactors, and flew back, and no one even knew. You think we can't bomb some narco terrorists from Venezuela? Yeah. I think we're okay.
So you're not losing sleep over this. You're not
not
at all worried. All right, because I'm wondering when the left is going to snap back at it. I brought this up to Aviv Reddy-Gur, and I asked him if he thought the International Criminal Court would be serving anyone in the United States, and he laughed. Of course they're not going to. They only go after Israel, which brings me to Israel. The headline at the Times of Israel is that 40% of Gaza City is already controlled by the IDF. That strikes me as news. Were you aware of that?
No, that seems bonkers.
It does. Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
No.
What do you think they just have an utter incapability of messaging? They don't have any way to tell us anything?
Yes, Israelis are really, really, really profoundly bad at PR. It would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. But I mean, everything that we saw from the last 2 or 3 months has just been like, you want to bang your head against the walls and ask them, please, can we send you some PR people from America?
Amen. Now I want to close with this. I listened to the commentary podcast. I gather you're moving to Northern Virginia.
What? I didn't listen to today.
Yeah, you don't listen to Seth? Seth
Not
is
today.
moving you guys to Northern Virginia. It's been the topic for the last 2 commentary podcasts.
I'm behind, clearly.
Yeah, you've got to go check it out because there's string involved. You have to listen. You got to have string on Sabbath.
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't know what that was. But J-Pod did a nice job of explaining for the Gentiles out there what they were talking about. But Seth had raised the objection that he couldn't move there because of the lack of that. and Mrs. Continetti
Yes.
corrected the record. So I just want you to know,
new one.
whatever that is, exists in Novo.
I'm gonna go listen
Bethany
to it right
Mandel, thank you. Follow her on X at Bethany Shondark and at the Substack, themomwars.substack.com. Themomwars.substack.com. That music means Jim Garrity joins us, Washington Post columnist, the Morning Jolt editor at National Review, participant in The Editors, and of course, co-host of the Three Martini Lunch podcast. Jim, I want to start with the obvious thing, which is the president ordered a strike on drug runners from Venezuela in international waters and blew them right up. And immediately the left objected that he didn't have the authority to do that. What say Jim Garrity?
I love seeing boats full of drug runners get blown up. By the way, happy Friday, Hugh.
Thank
I don't
you.
know about you. TGIF this week has just flown by. And for every listener who's out there who's like, wait a minute, doesn't Jim usually appear on Fridays? Yes, it is Friday. You don't have to go to work tomorrow. And let's see how much.
Well, he got traded to Thursdays, America, for a draft choice and the Jets' entire starting quarterback room.
Wait, you're going to double it with the Browns room? All right. But anyway.
Yeah,
back
we
to
need
the
8
blowing up the
quarterbacks.
boat. Yeah.
We need 8.
So, I think this is, conceivable. Like, I'm not going to put any, waste a lot of time defending the good nature of the guys who got blown up the other way. Tren de Aragua, SN de Agua right now. Having said that, I kind of feel like if we're going to end up in using military force for what has traditionally been a law enforcement purpose, I'd like to have some clarity. And I think I'd like to see an authorization of military force come from Congress. This appears to be kind of entirely unilaterally decided by the executive branch. And I kind of feel like if we're going to expand the use of our military into an area we have not done before, this is probably the sort of thing would be a good thing to run by Congress. Republicans control Congress. You'd think that most of them would be on board with this sort of thing. I don't quite understand why Congress is just like Congress is abdicating its duties on a whole host of issues these days. And I kind of feel like this is another one where, because they're afraid of getting it wrong, would rather just Groundhog Day, just be like an ostrich, put their head in the sand and not weigh in on this. And I think this is the sort of thing that the Congress should weigh in on. If you want to do it, fine. I also am getting weird, clear and present danger vibes from this. In that case, President Donald Moffat was like, was going to deny it all and try to sweep it under the rug when things go wrong. To his credit, Trump puts out the video and lets everybody see exactly what's happening. So I can't say the president is dodging accountability in that sense. But if we're going, we have a lot of fair questions about, is this going to become a major new military commitment against this? Also, again, guys in the boat deserve it, but they've got other boats. You kill one kingpin, another one's going to come take his place. So,
well, I assume we've got more drones than we have Coast Guard cutters. And so I assume that we can drone a lot more drug runners than we can interdict them with Coast Guard cutters. But I went back and read the authorization for the use of military force from 2001, and I read it as expansively as I could, and I don't think it covers this. This was
Agreed.
done pursuant to the commander-in-chief power. And the only honest argument is it's a commander-in-chief power defending the United States, the same as would have happened had we taken down United flight headed towards the Capitol and the passengers hadn't. A clear and present danger, to use the Tom Clancy book's name. Do you think that holds up? If the president says, I don't want, and you can keep your stinking authorization for the use of military force, I'm the commander-in-chief and this was Southern Command.
Yeah, I don't like that argument to begin with, but if the president really wants to make that argument, then he has to make that argument. This was initially announced in the middle of a press event announcing the transfer of Space Command from Colorado to Alabama. And, Hegseth went on Fox and Friends, his old program, gave a statement about that. I'd really like to see an on-camera briefing from the Pentagon discussing more details about this operation, how it came together, what the objective of the mission is, what the mission parameters are. Like, if you come out and you lay out the case, I'm willing to be persuaded for it. But it basically feels like the executive branch has just said, hey, we're doing this. Try and stop us, Congress, if you want to. And I don't think that's the right attitude for this. And the irony is, I think probably most people in Congress, at minimum, would be open-minded about this or would be open to the idea. If not, I think some members of Congress would be enthusiastically supportive of this. The Republican Congress does not defy Trump a lot, But I still think I'd feel better if they were going to vote and everybody was on record saying, yes, we authorize the president to use this military force to go after these targets in this region of the world.
I'll come back with Jim Garrity in a moment. Don't go anywhere, America. I remind you, I'm in the ReliefFactor.com studio, and I want you to remember to take your Relief Factor. Every single hour of every single show, I remind you that I'm in the Relief Factor studio for a simple reason. They sponsor the program, and I take the product every single day and have for 12 years. The only supplement I've ever used, the one I want you to try if you've got the minor aches and pains that come with aging or exercise, and you should be doing the latter, and you're definitely doing the former, so give it a try. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or head over to their website, $19.95 for a 3-week starter pack at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. When I come back with Jim Garrity, we talk about the nuclear option, which is going off if Senator Thune is correct earlier in the program on Monday or Tuesday of next week. Jim Garrity is my guest. He of the Washington Post, National Review, and the 3 Martini Lunch, as well as the editors. He's a busy man. Mr. Garrity, the majority leader of the Senate, began the program today by telling me on Monday or Tuesday of next week, the Senate Republicans are going to follow Harry Reid's footsteps and change the rules regarding nominations because we have a complete blockade of historic proportions. I actually reviewed the data. He's right. H.W. Bush had 817 nominees confirmed by voice vote, unanimous consent. Bill Clinton had 1,100. W had 911. President Obama had 856. President Trump in his first term had 533 confirmed by voice vote or unanimous consent. Joe Biden had 530 in that category. In this presidential term of Donald Trump, there are 0. Count them, 0. They have successfully confirmed only 135 people out of the more than 1,200 positions that require such a vote. They've had to take 500 votes just to make the meetings go on time, compared to example in 2021, 358 votes over the entire year. 2023, 212 votes over the entire year, 500 votes. So Chuck Schumer's just shut it down. I am all in favor of this. It's nominees. It's in the Constitution. They ought to do it anyway. What do you think about the nuclear option? They're going to reserve judges, by the way. They're not going to put judges on the fast track. Same thing for judges. But it's going to be for the people who need advice and consent to do their jobs for the next 3.5 years.
I think in the spring you would characterize me as skeptical, but it's September. It's after Labor Day. There's really not an excuse for these kinds of delays. I think, advise and consent does not mean that every senator gets a de facto veto over nominations. Let's point out that if Democrats really think somebody's a terrible nominee, you just got to convince 4 Republicans. This is not an impossible task. If somebody's really that incompetent or that unqualified for it, you should be able to find 4 Republicans who are willing to say, Mr. President, you can find somebody else better to do this, and sub them in there. So yeah, I think that, and this is just a question of, can we get them to the floor for a vote? There's always a chance they can, end up being rejected. So yeah, if the numbers were not what they were, I would have been more skeptical of this. As I alluded to earlier in the program, I think Republicans in the Congress have been pretty darn acquiescent to everything Trump wants to do. But in this case, we're seeing the opposite problem, and Democratic senators who don't want anybody to come through into there. And that is not the way the founders intended this system to work. It is advise and consent. There are Republican majorities. Get these people into the jobs. Let them start their work. Again, it's September. You can't have this backlog of nominees in the Senate waiting for a vote.
Okay, so now you're not nearly as old as I am, but you might be old enough to remember 2005 when Bill Frist lined up the nuclear option to get Miguel Estrada and Carolyn Kuhl and a few other great judges confirmed, and 7 members of his 55-member majority defected and did the Gang of 14 deal. And then the Republicans lost the Senate in 2006, in large part because of the Iraq War, but some part being a pox on the Senate of the United States. Do you think 4 Republicans will bolt on Thune come Monday or Tuesday?
I don't know. I can see why senators love the blue slip. They love the idea of having this ability to withhold a nominee and delay it seemingly indefinitely. Because they really have a problem with it, or they want it as negotiating leverage in some other fight they're having with the White House or something. But I don't think that's the way the system was designed to set up. If they're a good nominee, vote yes. If they're a bad nominee, vote no. You should not be cast into limbo or cast into the phantom zone for months and months because one senator's got a problem either with you in particular or that. Now, look, are both parties pretty hypocritical in this? Yeah, but I think the Democrats are like champions of this.
Joe, they're world champions. They're undefeated, Jim.
And if I'm remembering correctly, A.B. Klobuchar came out and once, they'd realized they'd eliminated the filibuster for previous judges under Harry Reid. Then Republicans got rid of it for Supreme Court justices, and suddenly they had no way to stop Supreme Court justices they didn't like. All of a sudden, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Yeah, you were warned by it, by Mitch McConnell. He told you, he underlined it in red. It was a flashing neon sign. It could not have, once you give up this, once you take away this power because you're in the majority, you're not going to have it again in the minority. So is it conceivable, by the way, that this is going, like it's someday we'll have a Democratic president. There'll be Democratic cabinet nominees that Republican senators don't like, and they won't be able to have these kind of blue slip, endless delay process for nominees. Yeah, but you know what? I think if you're a Republican right now, you're willing to take that chance because, and by the way, if the blue slip power was just used for a handful of nominees and you could say, no, I got to do it. This guy's a really bad nominee, really underqualified. The ambassador to so-and-so who doesn't even know what language they speak and doesn't know the base. Well, maybe that's more like if there was a justifiable argument behind, okay, all right, I'd be willing to hear that out. But it just is
yeah, but it's not just blue slips.
We don't want Trump.
A lot of these people have gotten out of committee and have gotten a vote, and the Democrats insist on however many hours of debate and the motion for cloture. They're running the Four Corners. You're not old enough to remember the Four Corners offense, are you?
No, but they're basically, it's delay of game. It's basically, letting the clock get down to 0 for each possible one to get the game to run as slowly as possible.
That's why we have a shot clock in the NBA, and it's basically a shot clock for the Senate. So I am not upset about this. Very last question. In terms of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, they're dominating the media space. Is there anyone else in the Republican picture as a successor to Trump besides those two? Maybe Senator Cotton, maybe Senator Cruz. Do you think there's anybody else?
Yeah, I think those were the two that came to mind. And every once in a while, I'll see somebody and they'll be talking about the 2028 field and they'll mention somebody like Brian Kemp, governor of Georgia, who I think very well of. Or my current governor, Glenn Youngkin, who right now is appearing in ads for Winsome Sears in a gubernatorial race here in Virginia that's not looking great for Republicans right now. I think it's real. I used to always think that governors had these advantages because they were mini presidencies and you had your own little mansion and motorcades and you're working with the legislature and it seemed like, good training camp for a future president. I think that has shifted. As I look at Winsome Sears and the challenges she's having running for governor here, I find her name recognition numbers surprisingly low for somebody who's been lieutenant governor for 4 years. And I just kind of wonder, in the Trump era, is it tough for just about anybody to break through?
Jim, stick around for 3 more minutes. I want to talk about Lieutenant Governor Sears with you because I saw some numbers that gave me some hope. And so if I don't, I'm imposing on your time, but I'm going to impose on your time. Garrity will end the show. The transcript of my conversation with Senator Thune is over at hughhewitt.com. Jim Garrity, to close up the show. Winsome Sears was down by double digits when I was in town in July. She has now closed to within a half dozen, largely because Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot and Spanberger is a really awful candidate, and they insist on doing crazy things with students in Northern Virginia. Can she pull off what Ed Gillespie almost did with Mark Warner 6 years ago? Or 8 years ago?
You don't want the Ed Gillespie example because he didn't win. You want the
Glenn
Glenn
this
Youngkin
close.
example. Yeah,
he came this close.
Look, if within 6 or 7 points right now, not great, but it's not insurmountable between now and election day. And as you mentioned, that's better. You still obviously would rather be bad. Now, traditionally, the party that won the White House, the opposite party tends to win the governor's mansion here in Virginia. So that's challenge number one. I talked about the messaging issue. I think it's tough for somebody in the state level to break through when the news cycle is Trump, Trump, Trump all the time. Where I live in Northern Virginia, there are a bunch of laid off federal workers. They're not happy about this. I would also note that up until about a week ago, I saw almost no advertising for Winsome Sears. Now, obviously, I'm up here in Northern Virginia. Maybe it's my media diet, but I felt like I was seeing Spanberger ads everywhere. That has changed, I'd say, in the last week or so. I see TV ads, and they're featuring Glenn Youngkin, which I think is kind of interesting. If they're doing the DC Northern Virginia television market, using the incumbent governor talking about how great Winsome Sears and how she'll continue our record here in Virginia, blah blah blah. So I can't rule it out, but I also note that like the Republican Party is swimming uphill. They're running uphill. They're swimming against the tide. And also, there's
I
been
like
some
swimming
infighting.
uphill. I like swimming
That's
uphill.
twice as hard, right? That's you gotta get the water up the hill and then it's rolling.
But Jim,
so like,
what about the school issue? Loudoun County's still insane. So is Arlington. So is Alexandria. They're still doing stupid stuff. Are parents going to echo what they shouted 4 years ago?
I think that is the basically trying to rerun the Glenn Youngkin campaign against Terry McAuliffe is the best shot that Winsome Sears has. I know Miyares has been doing that, emphasizing that in his ads. He's the attorney general who's running for a second term. We don't have term limits for attorney general, so that's where you're allowed to go for another one. That would be, it was just on issues, Sears was doing pretty well. Spanberger has been dominating the airwaves. No issues of money there. And again, there's kind of a broadly anti-Trump mood, certainly in this part of the state. Like I said, I'm glad to see them on the air because, like, if you're a Republican, you're probably unlikely to ever win Northern Virginia. But what you want to do is keep it close. You want to minimize that margin, and then you want to run up your margins down in Norfolk and Virginia Beach and all across the rest of the state. Run up the
Southwest
tally in
Virginia,
Red
down in coal country. Yeah. Jim Garrity, we are out of time. You should go talk to your old sage advisor with whom I think you broke off relations like 10 years ago. Called him Obi-Wan Kenobi, I believe. Go find him and tell us what he has to say about Winsome Sears. Follow Jim Garrity on X at Jim Garrity. Listen to the Three Martini Lunch, the editors. Read them in the Washington Post. And thank you, Harley, Adam, and Dwayne. I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.